Okay, so now we're ready to talk about the Cold War and get things ready for Unit 9 essay. So I'm not trying to answer this essay question for you, but I do want to explain the Cold War. Okay, so everybody needs a definition of the Cold War, and this is about as simple as it gets. The key issue here, of course, is what we have: hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union. And that hostility then is played out in various means, short of direct military conflict. And why are we short of direct military conflict? Because
But I was gonna say it also has to do with like the prospect of like the atomic war, like neither of them wanted to do anything.
because this is what would have happened if there had been direct military conflict. So the Soviets didn't have an atomic bomb until 1949, but really the Cold War didn't really fully emerge until 47, and then what became sort of formalized in 1948. So really in that period where there was a recognition that we have a new kind of war on our hands, both sides had these weapons, and while it would have been difficult for what the Soviets really didn't know, I don't think that they knew that we only had, like one more bomb. But in any case, I mean, once you know how to make these things, they really are not difficult to make, shockingly. And certainly, it didn't take long for both sides to build up an arsenal and then what to make significant improvements in them by, 1950, I want to say 50, maybe 52 at the latest, where they've got hydrogen bombs. They're, many times more powerful than the ones that we dropped on Japan. So there really was a threat of like worldwide Armageddon if there were to be a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. And so what they found various ways to fight the Cold War without direct military conflict. Chiefly that was through diplomacy, it was through propaganda, and what I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the term proxy war. Okay, which is to say that there are various groups. In the first case, the Civil War that broke out in Greece at the end of World War II would be a good example, where the British were supportive of having the old Greek monarchy restored, and those who had Greece was mostly just evacuated by the Germans rather than being liberated by the Soviet Union. But there were a lot of communists who, this requires more explanation than I really thought about when I went down this road. Many of those who fought in the resistance to the Nazis during the years of occupation in Eastern Europe and places like Greece were in fact communists. Does anybody know why especially communists?
Because they didn't want to be fascists, so they went to the complete opposite.
And what the Nazis made it a point to try to hunt down as many of these people and kill them as they possibly could. So, to be a communist in Greece or Poland or someplace like that during the period of German occupation meant that you had to hide out, and so you may as well become a resistance fighter. Most of the French resistance in World War II were communists. That's probably a not well-known fact. Because the Germans were so hostile to them, again, it was dangerous to admit that you were a communist in the first case. And what a lot of other Frenchmen who were not communists, a lot of the conservatives really preferred the idea of Germany governing France to the communists having power, seriously. So anyway, there were native Greek communists, and so they wanted to make Greece a communist country, and the British and the non-communists in Greece wanted to restore normal government there. And so you've got these two sides, and so the Soviets were funneling arms and money into the communists, and Great Britain was trying to support the other side, and so that's how these things came about. This is way deep background. We always had conflict with the Russians about things, especially stuff related to the open door and Russia's desire to close off parts of Asia to for their own sphere of influence, if you will.
So communism was appealing in Europe because it was the opposite of fascism, probably, or you say that?
Well, so, no, look, in the first case, the appeal of communism was strongest amongst, really those people that Marx thought that they would be appealing amongst, which would be what working class people who felt exploited by, like, big industries. So you work in factories for low pay and what practically no benefits, and so an ideology that says that what the working class is going to overthrow the capitalist class and take over and equally distribute everything sounds pretty good. So that had grown, since the 1840s, really when Marx published the Communist Manifesto. After the Russian Revolution, socialism, and again, in this class, it's not so necessary that you guys be able to make a strict, differentiation between socialism and communism. Let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's say communism is a theoretical state that has never really existed. Okay, I'm gonna refer to the Soviet Union as a communist country, but it really wasn't. It was a socialist country. Marx's way of looking at this was that you've got capitalism, and when industrial capitalism reached its pinnacle, that's when there'd be a violent revolution, because the bourgeoisie capitalists would never give up power willingly, so they'd have to be overthrown. The working class would then take over. You'd have to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. Why would you have to have a dictatorship? Because if you're going to totally change the way society functions, and it's not going to be operated for the benefit of profit for those people who can make the most money, and you're going to distribute everything equally, and people are going to share equally in what's produced, then you're going to have to re-educate people, because people's heads don't work that way. And so that dictatorship would have to be put in place to re-educate people, and then when Marx theorized, when people learn to accept this new reality, then government wouldn't be necessary anymore. So that would be and that's when communism would really emerge.
So communism is supposed to emerge from the dictatorship.
Right, so no so-called communist state anywhere in the world ever got beyond the dictatorship of the proletariat. And for most of them, it was hardly a dictatorship of the proletariat. In the Soviet Union, for example, there was a communist elite, which is an oxymoron of the worst variety. But nonetheless, there was a communist elite. People like Khrushchev and others had what? They had summer homes and down in the Crimea, and they had the benefits of being in power. It was, again, a lot of things about Marx's ideas ran contrary, in my view anyway, to human nature. And certainly that was borne out in the Soviet Union. So while people were standing in long lines to get basic necessities, the ruling elite didn't have those kind of problems. They got the stuff that they
So it
wanted.
was basically just the bourgeoisie all over again.
Okay, so not quite that much. I mean, there was a genuine attempt in the Soviet Union and these other places to more equitably distribute goods and services, and to operate things on sort of a non-profit basis. There's a human nature element to this that says, if I have access to all this authority, there's got to be something in that for me other than being able to tell people what to do. I ought to be able to have access to better things, and that's what happened. All right. So anyway, enough with that. So Bolshevik Revolution gave a sort of emerging rivalry anyway, an ideological bent. But still, prior to World War II, we really, other than being sort of fanatically weird about communism, that communism was like some kind of disease that you could actually catch and it could infect the United States. Again, I'm thinking about 1919 and 1920 and the whole Red Scare idea. We really didn't have, our interests were not so much in direct conflict like they came to be after World War II. But this ideological aspect is very important. Okay, it's you can't explain the Cold War without the ideological differences between the United States and the Soviet Union, because frankly, if you set out to create two countries that were just as opposite as they could be in ideological terms. You couldn't do any better than the Soviet Union and the United States. So World War II and the alliance between the U.S. and the Soviet Union was both temporary and definitely an aberration, by which I mean there was not anything really natural about it. We just had the same common enemy, which was what? Fascist Germany. Our relationship with them, despite the fact that the media, behest of the Roosevelt administration, tried to paint the Soviet Union as our real allies, and Uncle Joe Stalin is really a nice guy. Not. So there efforts to portray them really as being friends of ours, but the relationship was always tense. Stalin never trusted us, although he did, to the greatest extent that we can understand this, he did develop a relationship with Roosevelt where there was like some level of trust there. And I mention that because when Roosevelt dies in April of 1945, Harry Truman becomes president, and Truman was not Roosevelt. One of my favorite ways to explain this, I hope that you all get it, is that what Roosevelt could say "my good friend" in like 15 different languages. Well, Truman only spoke one language, and that was blunt. So this is how Truman handled things. So his ability to get along with Stalin didn't exist. In fact, Truman's demeanor and the things that he said, though true, made Stalin fear that this guy wants to bring on World War III. So that's going to be another element, a personal element in the emerging Cold War. So you can trace the beginning of the Cold War from that time when it becomes evident, and the more it became evident that the Allies were going to win World War II, then you see the outlines of the Cold War starting to emerge. I would really sort of trace that back to, at least from the point of view of hindsight, that when we had to delay the Normandy landings, when we wanted to do it in May of 42, and we put it up to 43, then we put it up to 44. Stalin interpreted all this as a lot of foot dragging, and Britain and the United States are trying to wait in the hope that Germany and the Russians kill each other off. And again, Churchill had said things that would be so bad if they did. Not publicly, but so anyway, after the success of the Normandy landings, Germany's fate was sealed, because now they're fighting a two-front war again, just like they did in the First World War, and so victory was inevitable. I mean, the whole last gasp thing in the Battle of the Bulge, I don't think that there was any realistic chance that the Germans could have thwarted the end. All they did was really prolong things by a few months. So when it became evident that the Allies are going to win, then the emphasis was less on war plans and so forth, and cooperative planning to win the war. It was more about what's going to happen when the war is over. And so that's when you begin to see these differences between the U.S. and the Soviet Union come out in terms of hostility, suspicion, and intransigence, I guess would be the other way to put it. You see all this in the wartime conferences at Tirana in 1943, when everybody's smiling and happy, and we're all good allies because by God we need each other. The war was definitely not won in 1943. So they, and again at these various meetings, they also, I guess it was Churchill that met with Stalin in 42. Forgetting where they met. But anyway, this was the first time that three of them had gotten together, and they confirmed the 1944 date for Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings, and They did reach certain like territorial agreements, so they're starting to think about, we feel like we can win the war, but it's not won yet. But when we do, there was this thing about Poland, Great Britain was very interested in Poland because this is what they had gone to war for initially. So remember, Britain declared war on Germany when the Germans invaded Poland. So the Soviets were demanding that they needed to receive territorial compensation for all their suffering in the Second World War. And FDR and Churchill said, okay, we will grant you that. And so they really didn't agree that Poland would actually be moved. They were going to cede territory that had been Polish territory to Russia. And then what? We can't just take territory away from Poland, because that would be mean to the Poles. So we'll just give them part of Germany. So effectively what they said, we'll just move Poland over here. And so Germany became a smaller country, theoretically. Yalta is where all this stuff happens. This is really the origin of the Cold War. Because agreements that were made at Yalta, though intended to be temporary. I'm trying to think, other than having another meeting, that there anything that was decided at Yalta was really intended to be permanent. But the decisions that were made there became permanent because after this, there is no agreement. The United States and the Soviet Union, and again, I'm making the world sort of bipolar now, but that's the way it was. Great Britain very definitely understood that they were like the junior partner in this arrangement. And so it's going to be what American policy that really dominates things and Soviet policy. And so that's where the collision is going to be. And so agreements that were made here that were intended to become temporary are not temporary, they become permanent. Okay, and so this is the basis of the Cold War, especially when we look at it in Europe, which of course is what they were talking about. They were not really, there was discussion at Yalta about the situation in Japan, mostly that the Russians would join the war against Japan as soon or within, 3 months or 6 months after Germany surrendered. The Russians agreed that they would enter the war against Japan. Roosevelt wanted them to do that because we thought it was probably going to be necessary to invade the Japanese home islands, and we were already suffering, very high casualties in these little limited island encounters out in the Pacific. And so they felt we really have to invade Japan itself. That's going to be extremely costly, and we don't want to bear that burden all by ourselves.
I don't really understand why Russia declared war on Japan and we were just going to drop another bomb on them.
Well, because we were, pretending that, first of all, the bomb didn't exist. It had not been successfully tested. It was being worked on. But we didn't know if it would work. We certainly didn't even want to tell Stalin we were working on it, even though he knew that we had spies in the Manhattan Project. When Truman told him about the successful test of the atomic bomb, which was in July of 1945 at Potsdam, the next conference after this, he was looking to get some kind of reaction from Stalin about this new weapon that we have. And Stalin just smiled and said, I hope you use it against Japan. And he already knew. So he wasn't surprised that they had this new weapon because he had spies in the program. So anyway, at Yalta, nobody knew whether the bomb could be developed, if it would work. It was still experimental, and so having to, again, and sometime next week I will show you some of this footage of some of these battles in the Pacific, and you'll understand why we were anxious to get assistance from somebody else if we're going to have to invade Japan itself.
Truman and FDR both knew though that Stalin knew about the Manhattan Project, right? When they in 1944 or something.
Truman, I don't think Roosevelt knew that there were spies, and Truman definitely didn't, because it was a huge, big negative revelation when in '46 the word began to get out that there were spies. Initially, they were British. I'm trying to remember what the guy's name was, who was discovered to have been a spy for the Soviet Union. But no, Truman nor Roosevelt knew that there were spies in the Manhattan Project. Somebody may have been suspecting that there were, but.
So did the Soviet Union declare war on Japan after we dropped the first atomic bomb? Because I thought it'd be easier.
Just before, I think. It was either just before or just after.
I think it was after they dropped the first one, but in between they dropped the second one. So did they do that because they thought it would be easier for them to?
No, they did it because we promised to give them certain territory, the northern half of Second Island, this island up here, and then certain other territory here, in exchange for entering the war against Japan.
Because at that point it was more clear that we could win the war after the bomb, or just.
Well, we had already made the deal with them, and so I'm not sure that Stalin might rush their involvement. I think they declared war exactly on the schedule that they set. That, you know, whatever was 3 months or 6 months after Germany surrenders, that Russia would declare war on Japan, and they did. I mean, they were like right on the day, and it just happened to be before the actual Japanese surrender came, and it may have been, like I said, it was either just before or just after the first bomb was dropped, but definitely before the second one was. And it still took Japan, that was August, it took, close to another week, the 14th, before they really agreed that they would surrender. And then September 2nd is when the actual, documents were signed.
Pretty soon after Nagasaki is when Russia started developing their first bomb, right? Or was it later?
Oh, I'm sure they started working on it, but I probably were working on it immediately. I'm not sure whenever they got word about what we were doing. But and of course the Germans had been working on this also. So.
Do you know if U.S. knew about that, or did they have spies in the Russian prison?
I know that Truman was told that it would take the Russians several years to develop their own bomb, and then it didn't. All right, so important at Yalta was this agreement and this statement that was released, the Declaration of Liberated Europe, which said what? That the earliest possible establishment through free elections of government responsive to the will of the people. That's a direct quote from this document that Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin all signed. And so Churchill and Roosevelt especially, and then even more so, Truman after them, who Truman was not at Yalta, and Roosevelt kept him completely in the dark. He didn't know about anything. He didn't know about the atomic bomb. He didn't know about the Manhattan Project, which was super top secret. But anyway, so this language, the Western powers understood what free elections of governments responsive to the will of the people meant. That just didn't mean the same thing as Stalin. And it's not clear at Yalta. There are a lot of uncertainties about Yalta, and some people who were there with Roosevelt felt that that there was an unspoken understanding between Stalin on the one hand and Roosevelt and Churchill on the other, that we knew what the Russians were going to do, that they were going to dominate Eastern Europe, and they were going to establish governments in those places that were, in Stalin's words, friendly to the Soviet Union, which of course came to mean what? Communist. And so anyway, but this was a statement that was agreed upon. So again, some argue that Stalin accepted this because, I continue to need the support of the Western powers in order to bring about final defeat of Germany and so forth. But I have no intention of really doing this, even though, again, there's no real clarity about exactly that. And then we're going to do the things that are needed to be done to facilitate the election, these kind of free elections. There was a separate declaration on Poland, which the British insisted upon because they had gone to war for Poland. So again, the separate declaration on Poland was basically just re-emphasizing this Declaration of Liberated Europe, but specifically for Poland. There was a Polish government in exile in London, which became known as the London government. The Soviets established a new government in Lublin, Poland, which was a communist government. So here's the big three, and again, if you look at this picture carefully, especially if you think back to other photographs that you've seen of Roosevelt, he's looking pretty frail. And so this was in February 1945, so he's close to his death. they also agreed then on the four-power occupation of Germany, which was an agreement to disagree. In other words, they couldn't agree on what to do with Germany, apart from like giving half of it to Poland. So it was agreed that the victorious powers, so that'd be what, Soviet Union, Great Britain, the United States, and then we'll be nice to the French and give them a part also. They each got a zone of occupation. And again, this was to be temporary until what? We could get representatives of the Big Four together and work out details about how Germany would be governed going into the future. Nobody was prepared to what? To just allow the Germans to create some new government like they did after World War I. So what we can't agree on this now. So for the time being, when Germany's defeated, and they actually what? Got out the map and they drew lines and so forth, and the US will have this part, and the Soviet Union will have this part, and so on and so forth. So this is all prearranged. And when the German surrender came, everybody followed those rules that had been established at Yalta. So like the US had taken over parts that were supposed to be in the Soviet zone, so we withdrew back to those lines that had been predetermined. So that's how all this was done. It was agreed that Germany had to pay reparations like in the First War. Soviets would agree to enter the war against Japan. We're going to try especially Germans, both civilian and military officials for various kinds of war crimes.
How would Germany pay reparations for the split between four different powers?
Good question. The Soviets literally started dismantling factories and other facilities in their zone of Germany, and just literally shipping bricks and machines back to the Soviet Union. Stalin at Yalta suggested that, well, maybe we've got an awful lot of German prisoners of war. Maybe we could just keep them as reparations. Well, so this is like insight into Stalin's thinking about things, because what would that be? Maybe slave labor, but I'm thinking like the death camps that we've. So that's Stalin's way of thinking about things. Okay, so this whole Declaration of Liberated Europe becomes a huge issue. The division of Germany, of course, becomes a huge issue. And what? That division of Germany became permanent because what? The U.S. and Britain and France consolidated their three zones into what became the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, and the Soviet Union created a government in their zone, became the German Democratic Republic. Because what? In Cold War language, from the Soviet Union's point of view, everything that was democratic was communist, or East Germany. Roosevelt then, of course, died in April, and Roosevelt certainly did see himself as really the diplomat between Stalin and Churchill, who were, I don't want to say they were similar personality types, but they certainly both were strong-willed and not especially diplomatic. Maybe we can put it that way. But now Roosevelt's done. There are historians who believe that Roosevelt's death was really central to the emergence of the Cold War. That if Roosevelt had lived, he would have been able to moderate some of Stalin's excesses